Hello and welcome to the JSA Studio. I'm your host, as always, Nathan, and today I'm coming at you with a full 32 team ranking of the NFL draft classes this off season. I'm going to grade every single team. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time going in depth with each team because I already made individual videos for all of them. But before we actually get into the actual content of this video, which is ranking all of the draft classes, I just want to preface this by stating the obvious. I'm going to be wrong on a lot of this stuff. Like, I already know I'm going to have bad takes in this video. And you know why I'm posting it anyway? Because everybody is wrong all the time. What I want to do is explain to you in a coherent and hopefully in-depth manner why I am coming to the conclusions that formulate my opinions. I'm trying to push people away from hot take spaces and towards actual insightful and intelligent conversations surrounding these things. That was the whole point in me making this YouTube channel. Also, if you're going to come at me for being unprofessional, dog, I don't even have 500 subscribers. What are you expecting? That one was just a little bit of a pet peeve that I've gotten that comment several times where it was like, you're not professional. Dog, I've got 473 subscribers right now. Of course I'm not professional. Anyway, side tangent to a side tangent aside here. If you disagree with me, make the comment, tell me why, and I may change my mind. You might be right. Like, the first thing I'm going to talk about is how I'm probably wrong about the team that I have ranked 32nd, because it depends solely on one player. But if you're going to leave a comment because you don't like where your team is ranked in this video, then tell me why. And ultimately, it's probably just going to boil down to we have different opinions on the players that you drafted. You might be right, I might be right, or it might be somewhere in the middle. We don't know yet. What I'm trying to give you here is a intelligent and well thought out take about how I think these draft classes should be ranked. However, ultimately, it's just my unprofessional and relatively uninformed opinion. So save the insults. It's not going to get you anywhere. And now, with the intro done and out of the way, there's only one thing left to say, and that's to remind you to like, comment, and subscribe for this video. Okay, moving on. The 32nd ranked team is the Denver Broncos, and I had them graded as a C. And their draft class, in all honesty, is probably not that bad. They just made the biggest reach and what I think is the worst pick of the draft in the first round, which is the most important pick that you make in the draft. And you reached on Bo Nix. Not only was he not my 6th highest graded quarterback, he was my 7th highest graded quarterback, but also I had a top 100 grade on him, meaning a pick at value for him would be between picks 76 and picks 100. You reached 4 tiers. You went to past top 75, top 50, top 40, into the top 20 in order to draft him. That is a massive reach, in my opinion. And even though the rest of the draft class probably would have gotten you a B- or a C+, that pick alone knocks you down pretty far. So the grade overall is a C. If you want a more in-depth analysis of the Denver Broncos, I am going to link all 8 of my division by division draft class breakdowns in the description as well as the pinned comment. My 31st ranked team is the Atlanta Falcons, who I actually downgraded from a C+ to a C when I went back and regraded a couple of these things, looked at them in the greater context of the draft classes as a whole. And once again, it was a reach in the first round that largely did you in here, because I actually kind of liked your day 2 a little bit, but Michael Penix was, I believe, a top 40 grade for me. which is a 2-tier reach, taking him into the top 10. So that grade was a C+. And then also taking Rook Ohorhoro in the second round was also a major reach for me, because that would be in the top 40 tier technically. However, your other two defensive line picks I really liked. And I like Rook as well, but he's more of a rotational player along the inside for me. He's probably not someone that I'm going to want on the field all the time, which is why I had a late day 3, early day 4 kind of grade on him. I don't remember exactly where I had his draft grade. But Trice and Dorless, I think, carried the draft class. The rest of the class, not that big of a deal. Day 3 can kind of, maybe it can be the difference between a solid grade and a plus grade, or a solid grade and a minus grade. But very often it's not going to be defining of your draft class. And that was a little bit of a mixed bag for you guys as well. But ultimately, I bumped you down to a C from a C+, because I do think you are a little bit worse than the grades that I have at C+, although you're better than Denver. My 30th ranked team was the Washington Commanders. And again, this is a theme with these classes here at the bottom. Jaden Daniels was a little bit of a reach for me, taking him as QB2. If you had taken him as QB3 at 3, even though I had a top 10 grade on him, and technically that would mean that it's a B-, I probably just would have given you a B anyway, because what else are you going to do? But you didn't do that. You took my QB3, and there was a pretty significant gap in my mind between Drake May and him. So effectively, however, your day 2 knocked you down to a B- with a couple of big time reaches, even though I really liked your second round. It was the third round where there was some big time reaches there, in my opinion. And then day 3 knocked you down another tier to a C+, because again, there were a lot of reaches there, in my opinion. Even though I think Jaden Daniels is going to be a very good quarterback, and he was also probably the quarterback with the highest floor, in my opinion, I still definitively would have taken Drake May over him. And had you taken Drake May, this might have been a B-, and you probably would have been ahead of some of these other teams that we have graded as a B- here on this graphic. 29th team was San Francisco. And this one, again, was a big reach in the first round for me. I really liked Ricky Pearsall as a player, but I had a top 100 grade on him because I don't see wide receiver 1 upside with him. Effectively, if I think you have the potential to be a wide receiver 1 in the NFL, I'm going to have a top 20 grade on you. If I think you will be a wide receiver 1 within your first 4 years in the league, I'll put you at a top 10 grade. And if I think you're going to be a wide receiver 1 year 1, we're talking about top 5. Okay. But if you're a top 40 player, maybe you can get there, but most likely you're a high end number 2. And top 50/75, again, you're probably not talking about wide receiver upside, and we're talking about how good you are going to be as a wide receiver 2. And if you're past the top 75 grade, you might not even be a wide receiver 2 in my mind. And that's kind of where I was with Ricky Pearsall, and that was the big hit you took. I thought there were several better players that you could have taken there, and that I think would have fit what you had on your roster better, as opposed to effectively signaling that you're going to trade Brandon Ayuk, because Brandon Ayuk and Ricky Pearsall play the same position. And I'm not just specifically talking about wide receiver. They're both Z wide receivers in my definition of what a Z wide receiver is. So I think that signaled pretty clearly that after this year, or maybe even before this year or at the trade deadline, Brandon Ayuk is likely out the window, which I'm being honest with you, I'm not on board with. I think that's a definitive downgrade. I think Brandon Ayuk's floor going forward as a player is higher than Ricky Pearsall's ceiling as a prospect. So that one and a couple of other iffy picks, in my opinion, is why you're ended up being this low here. Okay, moving on now to the B minuses, and there are quite a bit of B minuses. I think there's 7 or 8 teams that I've graded as a B minus. So it's at this point I kind of just want to say outright here, if you want to tell me that Buffalo is better than Green Bay, who I have at 24 here, I'm not going to argue with you. I have the same grade on them, and ultimately it was just which draft classes did I like better? Who do I think did a better job? And that's really the tiebreakers here. So if you want to move them around in their own tier to make yourself feel more comfortable, go for it. But this is ultimately my opinion, and I'm probably not going to argue with you on if you want to put Buffalo ahead of Houston or you want to put Tampa ahead of Cincy. I'm not going to argue with you. I think that's perfectly reasonable. But if you want to put San Francisco ahead of Buffalo, I might give you a little bit of pushback because I do have them graded in different tiers here. Okay, now that little bit of exposition out of the way here. Buffalo, I had at a B minus. After day one, you were at a B probably because you traded back. But then day two, I think you probably got pushed down to maybe even a C plus in my mind. You reached on Cole Bishop pretty significantly, as well as Dwayne Carter pretty significantly, in my opinions. And then day three, you did have 2 picks that I really, really liked, and Cedric Van Pran, who I think is going to be a starter, as well as Daquan Hardy, who I think is going to contribute year one for you guys. But that's not enough to really push you back into the B range. And I just think there was a little bit more of a mixed bag than some of these other teams, which is why I've got you at 28. I've got Houston ranked at 27 here, and after day 2, you were probably still at a B. You reached a tad bit for Blake Fisher and Kamari Lassiter. You just reached one tier above where I had them graded. Not that big of a deal. And I really liked the Kalen Bullock pick, who I think is going to be a starting player for you. So maybe even you were kind of leaning towards maybe even being a B plus after day 1. But the Cade Stover pick in the 4th round kind of settled that for me. I'm not a big fan of Cade Stover as a prospect. That was a major reach. And day 3, you did kind of fumble the bag a little bit for me, and that you went from leaning towards a B plus, but maybe a B still, to firmly a B minus, in my opinion, because of that 3rd day, and specifically the 4th round selection of Cade Stover. Just not a fan of that pick. For Tampa at 26, Graham Barton was an okay pick. I think he's probably going to be a starter and be a solid offensive lineman for a long time. I had him graded as a top 40 player. You took him at 26, solid value. Chris Broswell, I actually had a top 50 grade on him. You got him at 57, so that's some good reach there. However, the Tyke Smith pick is probably why you're a B minus and not a B. So you were kind of really close to it, but Tyke Smith was a significant reach in my mind for an undersized safety that I don't think it has the physical ability to play in the slot, even though that's probably where he's going to have to end up playing, because I don't know if he's athletic enough to actually play a more traditional safety role. But day 3, pretty much par for the course. You reached a little bit, but the whole draft outside of that Tyke Smith pick is probably a B as opposed to a B minus. But that pick, I think, did pull you down a little bit. Cincinnati at 25. If I'm being honest with you here, you're probably a B plus caliber draft class, especially your first 3 picks, day 1 and day 2. I thought you did really good. Love Armarius Mims. Chris Jenkins, I think, is an immediate impact player, and Jermaine Burton is a brilliant replacement for Tyler Boyd. However, on day 3, you drafted 2 tight ends, both of which I did not have a draftable grade on. Eric All was a massive reach. Tanner McLaughlin, slightly less so, but a really big reach there. But outside of that, you were probably a B plus caliber class. But the Eric All pick, I get he went to Michigan, and I'm a Michigan fan, so I should be hyping you up for that. But I got to be objective here. I just, that's not a draftable tight end prospect. Maybe in the 7th round because you like the traits or whatever, or the work ethic or the player, or just the personality. I can get behind it maybe, but not in the 4th round. Green Bay's last team on this section of the draft classes that we're going to be talking about here, and honestly, wholeheartedly, really kind of liked your first 2 days of the NFL draft here. Jordan Morgan was one of the biggest my guys in this draft class. I think he's a decade-long starter at left tackle day one with legitimate Pro Bowl caliber upside written just all over him as a prospect. If his arms were 2 inches longer or even just like an inch and a half longer, I think he would have been a top 10 pick in the draft. Very, very, very good player that measurables were kind of holding him back a little bit, especially at the offensive line position. Edgerton Cooper was another guy that I really, really liked. Marshawn Lloyd was a running back that I really liked. I think he was my RB5 or something. However, you do kind of lose the plot on day 2 of the draft, and specifically the Evan Williams pick, safety out of Oregon. I think I had a priority undrafted grade on him, and you kind of were reaching all over the place. You had the one pick with Michael Pratt that I liked, but day 3 pulled you down pretty significantly to a B minus, in my opinion, although you were right there for a B or a B plus if you had made like one less of those picks that I didn't particularly like. Jacksonville is the last team that I have graded as a B minus, and you were so close to a B or a B plus, or maybe after day 1 even just a really, really good, maybe even A minus class, because I love Brian Thomas Jr. I had a top 10 grade on him. I think he's a Pro Bowl caliber wide receiver within 2 or 3 years for you. I think you finally got that wide receiver 1 that Trevor Lawrence needs. I love Brian Thomas Jr. But day 2, B minus, B probably pulled you down to a B plus sort of ish range, but you were all over the place on day 3. 2 grades at a C plus, 1 grade at a C minus, 2 grades at a B. You did have the 1 B plus pick, but that's not enough to save you from knocking me down. Very, very close to a B grade, but ultimately I felt like the teams that I had graded as a B were just a little bit better overall, so to speak. Tennessee is up next, and you were the opposite of Jacksonville in terms of the way I looked at that class. Because after day 1, it was looking pretty bad. I'm not a big fan of J.C. Latham, especially flipping him from right tackle to left tackle, which I believe is the plan. Maybe I'm wrong. You can correct me if I am wrong. But after day 1, it was not looking good. Day 2, you only had the 1 pick, Devondre Sweat, a little bit of a reach, but you're probably sticking at a C+. But you knocked day 3 out of the park. You got a starting linebacker in Cedric Gay in the 4th round. You've got several players that I just had graded better than where they got drafted. So after day 2, you were probably kind of tilting between C plus and B minus, and day 3 brought you all the way up to a B, but it was kind of just barely a B. You know what I mean? You were still kind of tilting towards a B minus, but ultimately a B. This is a solid class. I think you got some contributors in year 1, but also some interesting developmental pieces as well. Carolina Panthers were the next team up here. Kind of the same story as Tennessee, where you were kind of just barely a B, but I ultimately think you did enough good to get you that B grade as opposed to a B minus. This draft class was very clearly pretty much all about helping Bryce Young, and I think you did that to an extent. Free agency, you went out, got some offensive linemen, and now here in the draft, you got him 2 wide receivers to throw the ball to, and a running back that should be able to help getting the running game going. And I really like Xavier Legette. I think he has the opportunity to be a high-end number 2 wide receiver in the NFL. Now, wide receiver 1 maybe you need to look at that at some point, but not that big of a deal right now. You got my number 2 highest graded running back in Jonathan Brooks. You got my number 2 tight end in the 4th round in Ja'Tavion Sanders, who, yes, a little bit undersized, but as a receiving weapon, I think is going to contribute a ton, especially over the middle of the field, and really help out Bryce Young from day one in this class. That's one of my favorite picks in the whole draft was Ja'Tavion Sanders to Carolina here. But you did have a couple of reaches as well. Trevin Wallace in the 3rd round was the big one. Jaden Crumedy, an interior defensive lineman out of Mississippi State, which I had an undrafted free agent grade on. Not somebody I probably would have drafted really under any circumstances, but you guys liked him. Maybe I'm wrong. Perfectly willing to admit that that might be the case. Overall, tad bit of a mixed bag, but more consistent than Tennessee, I think. So puts you at 21. The Indianapolis Colts are ranked 20 in my ranking. 1st round, Latu, I had a top 20 grade on him. Took him there. Great pick. And your 2nd round selection, I thought we were staring down the barrel of like a top 5 class, because getting Adonai Mitchell in the 2nd round outside of the top 50 is an absurd value. He was a top 15 player in this draft class for me. I think he was wide receiver 5 for me, but I had him as like the 13th or 14th overall player in the entire class. I had a top 20 grade on him. Fantastic player. I legitimately think by year 2 or 3, that's your wide receiver 1. I think he's going to be very, very good at the NFL level. However, your next pick, Matt Goncalves, offensive tackle out of Pittsburgh, that was a big time reach. And it was almost like Adonai Mitchell's good and that reach kind of like perfectly offset each other. And we ended up back at a B. Day 3, similar sort of story, a little bit all over the place. 2 C pluses, 1 B plus, 1 B minus, 2 Bs, kind of all averages out to a B grade. And that's where I've got you here in this draft class. Now, unlike the previous teams on this list here, Dallas, you pretty much just hit for par every round, and that's why you're here. You know, you were under par one time, over par twice. You're right there at a B. Not a whole lot to talk about. You picked a lot of guys that I like, that I think are going to be contributors, and that's really about it. You just went right down my draft board and picked players that I think are going to help you out this year. Solid class. The grade's a B. The 2-time defending Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs are almost smack dab in the middle here. Xavier Worthy was your 1st round selection. This is someone that is, obviously the comparison is going to be Tyreek Hill. I don't think he's as good as Tyreek Hill, and I don't think he ever will be as good as Tyreek Hill. But he is going to give you that vertical threat that you have been missing since you traded Tyreek Hill to Miami. You didn't really have that until now, and now you do. And obviously with a couple of other pieces that may or may not be on the field this year, you know who I'm talking about. That wide receiving core is looking pretty good. Kingsley Suamataia, I think, is a starting left tackle day 1, and someone with a ton of upside at that position as well. So after day 1, you were probably leaning towards B+. However, you did reach a little bit with your 4th round selection, and then in the 5th round, you reached pretty bad, and that kind of kept you at a B in my mind. So these next 3 classes, the Jets, the Patriots, and the Ravens, were very, very close to being B pluses for me. But ultimately, I decided to just keep them at B. And it was largely just because of the bottom tier of picks. New York, day 1, Olu Fashanu, had a top 20 grade on him, took him at 11. That's a pick at value. B, Malachi Corley, a little bit after value. And then day 3, Braylon Allen, A+, loved the pick, loved the fit. He's a brilliant complementary piece to your running back whose name is escaping me right now, Breece Hall. That's who it is. Brilliant compliment to Breece Hall. But a few picks later, you take another running back, Isaiah Davis, and I didn't like him very much. So those two picks kind of canceled you out, and then the rest of the picks left you right at a B, but you almost maybe should have been at a B plus. I don't know. It's really, really close. But ultimately, I just made the call, and I decided to keep you at B. New England is up next. You bookend your draft with big-time selections with Drake May and Jaheim Bell, who was your last pick. So your first and last picks were almost borderline home runs for me. The rest of the draft, not so much. Caden Wallace is the pick, and that's the one that I don't get it. I don't get it. There were so many other players that you could have drafted at the tackle position that would have been better players. And that one, I can't wrap my head around it. And the rest of the draft class, you were kind of, below par or right at it. So ultimately, I kept you at a B. But those two picks, getting my number 2 quarterback as a third quarterback taken, as well as a top 100 player. I had graded as top 100 player in Jaheim Bell in the 7th round. Big time player. I liked him a lot. And bookending your draft class like that keeps you at a B. Baltimore, again, kind of a similar story with these last few picks here. You had some really, really, really good picks, but then also a couple of really, really bad picks, in my opinion. Nate Wiggins in the first round, I had a top 20 grade on him. I think he's a brilliant scheme fit. I think that's a very, very good pick for you. I had a top 20 grade on him. Got him at 29. Great pick. Great player. Day 2, you made 2 picks that kind of canceled you out here a little bit, with Adisa Isaac, who got a top 50 grade on in the 3rd round, and Roger Rosengarten, which I had a 4th round grade on. So you kind of, those 2 picks smashed you together. You were probably leaning more towards a B plus. Then you take Tez Walker in the 4th round. He's going to be a contributor as a deep threat year 1. Maybe he develops into something more than that. He certainly has the potential to do that. I had a top 75 grade on him. Really, really, really good value. But then your next 2 picks, Rasheen Ali and specifically Devin Leary, those dragged you back down from maybe even like the middle of a B plus territory to a B, in my opinion. Specifically Devin Leary. That is a guy who was very bad in college. There were probably 25 other quarterbacks that in this draft class that I would have drafted over Devin Leary. And that one I can't even like wrap my head around either. Because even what's the best case scenario? He's a quality backup. You have to change the entire offense if he comes into the game and Lamar Jackson isn't there. So I don't get the thought process behind it. I don't get drafting the player, period. And that knocked you down from what was setting up to be a really, really good draft class, in my opinion. Minnesota, you had a interesting draft class in the sense that every single one of your picks that I had a grade on, because I did not have a grade on Levi Drake Rodriguez. However, every single pick that I had a grade on was a B, except for one, which was Kyrie Jackson, which I had an A on. So that pick alone in the 4th round bumped you up to a B plus. And I like the draft class. Like, it's hard to pick in the top 20 and not reach on somebody, because very often I don't have 20 players with top 20 or better grades. This year I actually did. I think I had like 23 or 24 players with top 20 or better grades. But normally it's kind of hard to do that. And you guys did it twice. So that's a big deal. That probably bumped you up to a B plus, if I'm being honest with you. And then the rest of the draft class, par for the course, except for Kyrie Jackson. I think you got 2 starters on defense in Kyrie Jackson and Dallas Turner, as well as potentially a starting kicker, and 2 offensive linemen that I think have the potential to be quality depth piece / spot starter kind of players. So Honestly, you did a really good job all around. And JJ McCarthy, I've spoken about him at length on this channel. People gave me a lot of shit for saying that, effectively speaking, he's basically just a ball of clay needing to be molded. And then, like, fucking one day of voluntary training camp, or rookie training camp, rather, it came out and Minnesota was like, oh, yeah, we're starting Sam Darnold. And JJ McCarthy needs to sit for probably at least one whole season, maybe longer. And people gave me a lot of crap for that, and I was right. I don't, generally speaking, go out of my way to acknowledge when I was correct. But this one, I was pretty confident at the time that I was going to be right. And sure enough, it's looking like I was. That being said, I still like JJ McCarthy. I think he's got a ton of upside. He's just not going to play year one, most likely. Overall, I like this draft class a lot. It's a really good draft class. I got you at a B plus for a reason. New York Giants up next. Malik Neighbors, I had a top 5 grade on him. Got him at 6. A B plus. Loved the pick. I think he's a wide receiver 1, day 1 in the NFL. Very, very good player. Tyler Newman, I think, is a starting safety in the NFL day 1 with Pro Bowl upside. Theo Johnson, I think, is your starting tight end day 1 with a ton of upside as well. You knocked this draft out of the park, except for Tyrone Tracy pick in the 5th round. That brought you down a little bit and kept you out of the A- range, in my opinion. But really, really good draft class with a limited number of picks. You only had 6 picks, but I think you got 3 starters probably, and probably another contributor in Drew Phillips as well. Seattle is my last team at 12. Byron Murphy at 16, picket value, B, loved it. He's going to be, I think, a Pro Bowl caliber defensive tackle in the NFL for a long time. Christian Hayes, one of the least talked about players that I think has a ton of upside, actually. I think he has Pro Bowl guard upside. Really like him. Tyrese Knight, though, in the 4th round, your 3rd pick. Big time reach, in my opinion. But you bounced back with your next few picks, picked a bunch of guys that I actually kind of liked, and then you drafted DJ James in the 6th round, which is maybe the steal of the draft, and the reason that I have you graded as a B+. Because getting someone that I had almost a top 50 grade on, I had a top 75 grade on it, but he was almost a top 50 player for me. Getting that at pick 192 is such phenomenal value that it pushed you to B+ range. Probably weren't getting to A-, but I don't really think any of these past 3 draft classes here at the B+ were really going to be pushing for A- anyway, if we do manage to swap out a pick or 2. But really, really nice draft class. I think you got maybe 4 starters with DJ James, AJ Barner, Christian Hayes, and Byron Murphy, and then also a player like Nehemiah Pritchett, who I think is probably going to end up playing a lot. Maybe not year 1, but in year 2 and beyond. At number 11, I've got Cleveland, and for not having any goddamn picks in this draft, you did really, really well. Michael Hall Jr. at 54 is a really good pick. He is someone who I believe is going to probably end up being your starting 3 technique by the end of the season. Zach Zinter is someone who maybe would have even gone in the 1st round had he not broken his leg. I had a higher grade on him than when you drafted him. This is an A- pick. Love Zach Zinter, starting offensive lineman, probably from day 1 if he's healthy. Jamari Thrash is another player that I really, really, really liked. I think he's going to contribute as a depth wide receiver and going forward just as flat out a wide receiver. Miles Harden is another guy that I really, really liked for your draft picks. Only 1 pick below value, and that was a B- for the 6th round guy. Tremendous draft class. We're kind of on the edge between a B+ and an A-, but for having so few opportunities and no 1st round pick to get this kind of value is tremendous for me, and that bumped you up to an A- grade. Now we're getting into the top 10 here with the Los Angeles, and really didn't make a whole lot of mistakes. Jared Verse at 19 is tremendous value. If you had gotten him 2 picks later, it would have been an A minus or an A, maybe even, as opposed to a B plus. But getting a B plus in the first round, that resets your standard from a B to a B plus heading into the rest of the draft. Day 2 with Braden Fisk, who's going to be a tremendous player. Really like him. He's not going to be Aaron Donald, but I think he's going to be a high-quality pass rusher from the interior day 1. And assuming you can get him to add a little weight and strength, could also potentially survive as a run defender. Blake Corum, not the biggest steal in the world, B minus grade, but not the biggest fan of him as an NFL prospect. Cameron Kitchens is going to start probably. Tyler Davis is going to be in the rotation. Bo Limmer is another maybe steal of the draft sort of player for your class. I think that's a starting interior offensive lineman. Now, as a commenter actually pointed out to me in that video, your interior offensive line is pretty much set. You got Avila at center, and then Dodson and Jonah Jackson at either guard spot. But if somebody goes down, you're set with Bo Limmer. You're going to come in, and I don't think you're going to see very much of a drop-off there. Only real sidestep you had was Jordan Whittingham, wide receiver out of Texas. I didn't have a draftable grade on him. But at the end of the day, the rest of the draft class was really, really, really good. And even the players where you did reach on, they were kind of just slightly reaches and not going to knock you down for that. This is a very, very good draft class. That's why you're in the top 10 here. All around, love this draft class. I think you reloaded on defense. I think you got some quality depth pieces and potentially contributors on offense as well. Arizona is up next. Very, very close with the Rams and the Raiders. I think there's a little bit of a gap with New Orleans and Chicago in terms of the A-minus teams, but really, really, really loved this draft class. Marvin Harrison in the top 5. Great pick, obviously. I gave it a B grade because of my expectations for a top 5 wide receiver. But after the first round, you're probably looking at a B minus, not an A minus, because Darius Robinson was just not a player I was a fan of. I'm not a player of the type of player that he is in terms of that tweener between an interior guy and an edge guy, because people are like, oh, he's strong enough to survive on the interior and powerful enough to play on the edge. I look at it as he's not big enough to play on the interior consistently, and he's not athletic enough to stick it at the edge position. Now, there are players like that in this draft class, as well as players in the NFL that are like that, but I just don't like that. That's not something that I'm looking for. I'd rather just have an interior guy or just have an edge guy as opposed to someone that I've got to create matchups for. That being said, not the end of the world. Day 2, really good. You had 5 picks on day 2. You had a B, a B plus, a C plus, a B minus, and another B plus with one of my favorite players in the whole class, in Elijah Jones. However, the C plus did kind of drag you down, but after that, you were probably looking at more of a B in terms of after day 1 and day 2, because I do think day 1 you're probably looking at a B minus, day 2 probably looking at B plus, average that out B overall. But you flat out and straight up, unless I'm forgetting a class, had the best day 3 of anybody in this year's draft class, and that knocked you up past B plus to A minus, in my opinion. Dorian Taylor-Demison, I think, is a starting safety. Xavier Thomas, I think, is going to be part of that edge rusher rotation year 1. Christian Jones, I think, is a starting offensive tackle in the NFL. Tejan Palmer, I think, is a contributor as a depth piece. Just nailed that class. And overall, I think you did a really, really good job at refilling and infusing this roster with talent. And that's been lacking these past few years. You haven't really had a whole lot of talent overall. And I think these past 2 draft classes, you've done a good job at filling out the roster. Las Vegas Raiders up next. You had a really, really good class. Love this class. Again, kind of close with Arizona and the Rams, but overall, you had one of my favorite picks of the entire draft, second round, 44th overall, Jackson Powers Johnson. I had a top 20 grade on him. Getting him at 44 is big time player. He's going to start at center or either guard position, and the offensive line is going to get significantly better. Brock Bowers, your first round selection, had a top 10 grade on him. Really, really good player. If you didn't draft Delmar Glaze, if you had drafted another offensive tackle that I had graded in that top 75 or top 100 tier, this class is probably a top 5 class. But that one pick pulled you back from an A plus to an A minus. Not a fan of Delmar Glaze, but everything else on day 3, solid picks as well. Just good overall draft class. Knocked day 1 and your second round pick out of the park. New Orleans, I think, is maybe the draft class that most people are going to disagree with me on. Most people are probably going to be like me, oh, had to go tackle in the first round. You just had to. And I do like Taliese Fuaga very much. He was my number 2 offensive tackle. But Kool-Aid McKinstry in the second round, I think other people are going to be on board with that as well. However, Spencer Rattler was probably my biggest crush in this draft class. I think Spencer Rattler has future starting quarterback written all over him. And I'm not alone in that assumption. There have been plenty of other people that have said this guy is someone who has starter traits. And I think it was the everything else at South Carolina that kind of let him down a little bit. And you can talk about locker room or off the field stuff with him. I don't know him. I'm not in the locker room. You don't know him. You're not in the locker room. You don't know if he's a good guy to be around or if he's toxic like everyone thinks he is. You don't know that. I don't take that kind of stuff into account when I'm grading players. It's just on the field stuff. And on the field, I loved him. This is a guy, he's got the arm talent. He's athletic enough. I think he's gotten better every year that he was in college. I think this is someone who you cut Derek Carr after this year. I don't know if you can. I haven't looked it over the cap. I don't know if you can cut him or not. But if you can, you cut his ass after this year, and then you kind of just wait for a little bit on a quarterback. Because I think you can roll with Spencer Rattler and get quality quarterback play. So that was a big pick for me. But then also getting someone like Christian Boyd, who I had a top 100 grade on, I believe, almost 100 picks after value at pick 199, just as an instant plug and play run stopper with a little bit of pass rush upside too, in my opinion. This was a really, really good draft class. Your first 3 picks were all above value, and that's when the bread and butter is going to be made. Really, really, really good draft class for me. Chicago is another team that I'm probably going to get some pushback on for having graded as an A minus. But you got to understand how I grade things. With the first pick, you took Caleb Williams. With the 9th pick, you took Rome Odunze. I had a top 3 grade on Caleb Williams and a top 10 grade on Rome Odunze. Both of those picks were at value. Okay? And they're like, how could you get an A plus with the first pick? You can't. That's the whole point of the first pick. I have expectations for that pick. My expectations for Caleb Williams, hitting for par for Caleb Williams, so to speak, would be a franchise-changing quarterback. You don't necessarily have to win the Super Bowl, but you have to be, I would say, at least as good as Matthew Stafford or a Matt Ryan, sort of Phillip Rivers level of player. You got to be at least that good. And those are all guys that are multi-time Pro Bowls. Matt Ryan won an MVP, so maybe he's a little bit more of an outlier in that case. But looking back on it, if Caleb Williams wins you a Super Bowl, wins an MVP, makes all-pro teams, and is 10, 12-time Pro Bowler, then yeah, that's an A-plus pick. But that's also exceeding my expectations for him. My expectations would be just really, really good quarterback that turns the franchise around. And I think he's going to do that. In the same sense, I think Rome Odunze, by year 2 or 3, is going to be a Pro Bowl, all pro caliber wide receiver. That's why I had him graded in the top 10. I think year 1, probably not the wide receiver 1, especially with Keenan Allen and CJ Moore taking receptions from him, and also Cole Kmet. And you got some running backs that are good out of the backfield too. You got a lot of weapons on there. So maybe we're not going to see the production out of Rome Odunze year 1. Also, I hope that Gotti changes his number. You can't be 15 and be an elite receiver in the NFL. Like, Brandon Marshall is the only exception. And yeah, he was 15 for you guys with the Bears. But that is not a good wide receiver number. You got to get him something else. That number has no aura, as the kids are saying these days. But beyond that, Karan Emegdije, I think, is a future starting left tackle for you. Austin Booker, I think, is a rotational caliber edge rusher with potentially starter upside as well. So just really, really good draft class. You only had 5 picks. You took a punter in the 4th round, a little bit of a reach, but it doesn't matter that much. Just love the draft class. This is one that I think Bears fans are going to look back at when they're winning the NFC North every year going forward. That they're going to be like, oh yeah, this is a great draft class. And I've got you ranked as an A- and the 6th overall class. Now we move on to the top 5 classes. At number 5, we have the Los Angeles Chargers. Joe Alt was a great pick. That's a franchise left tackle or right tackle. I think he's going to play at a Pro Bowl caliber level year 1. Really, really good pick. Day 2, Ladd McConkey, Junior Colson, 2 players that are going to start and contribute for you right away. Ladd McConkey, unironically, your best wide receiver, year 1 probably. Someone who I think has very, very good number 2 upside. But without having a number 1, you're probably going to force him the ball quite a bit. I really, really like Ladd McConkey, though. Junior Colson is going to start at linebacker and be very, very good as well. At your day 3, Justin Aboigi, rotational interior pass rusher, day 1, love it. Terheeb Still, developmental corner, love it. Cam Hart, don't know if he's going to play safety or corner. Either way, love the player. Big time athletic upside. Kamani Vidal, it's whatever, 6th-round running back. But your last 2 picks knocked it out of the park and pushed you from just being an above average class into genuinely being one of the 5 best in this draft class. Was your last 2 picks. With Brendan Rice, who's probably, in my opinion, going to end up being your wide receiver 2 by the end of the year, and Cornelius Johnson, who's going to be an elite caliber special teams player for you, a core special teams player, and a quality 4th or 5th option in an offense. Very, very underrated prospect, in my opinion, Cornelius Johnson. Love, love, love those last 2 picks. Knocked this draft class out of the park. Every single player on here I could see becoming contributors very early on in their career. At 4, with the first A+ draft grade, knocked it out of the park, my Detroit Lions. Terrion Arnold was a top 20 player in this class for me. Loved him. Addressed their biggest need as well. They doubled down with corners with Ennis Rakestraw, who I had graded at a top 50 grade as well. Really, really good player. Giovanni Manu, I did not actually have a grade on him, but I decided to watch some film on him because it was my team. Probably would have had a 4th-round grade on him, but didn't necessarily like the trade up to go get him and Sione Vaki as well. So I gave both of those grades a B-. But then next 2 picks, Mekhi Wingo, Christian Mahogany, are both players that I think are going to be starters by year 2 or 3 in Detroit. Love, love, love those picks. This is an A+ draft class for me. Really, really, really good. And just, I think this is going to help this team this year and also allows them to spend their money smartly on terms of who do you let walk, who do you keep around. And also, you're getting a couple of players here with Giovanni Manu. If he develops nicely, could potentially end up being your left tackle or your right tackle of the future, and you can either cut Taylor Decker or let him walk after 2 years, and you've got a replacement. it allows you to potentially save money. It gives you flexibility in terms of who you can let go. Just a tremendous draft class for the Detroit Lions. Now, as for Miami, if you go and watch my individual grades for them, then I had them graded as an A, not an A minus. I have retroactively changed that. This is an A plus draft class. And just specifically because I love almost all of their picks. I had one pick that I didn't particularly like, but it was the 6th round selection, so who gives a shit? I love this draft class. Chop Robinson at 21 is good value, and Patrick Paul, I think, is a starting offensive tackle year one with legitimate big-time upside as well. Jalen Wright, my God. You have the fastest running back room maybe in the history of the NFL. This is someone where you've got insurance in case A-Chain or Raheem Morris gets hurt. It's just a brilliant pick. I had a top 75 grade on him. Just tremendous. Love Jalen Wright. Muhammad Kamara is someone who I think has starter upside along the edge. Malik Washington, I think, is going to contribute to this team year one as potentially a returner, but also as a slot receiver. Really, really like him. Same thing with Taj Washington, another guy that I just really, really like. This is an A-plus draft class for me. I don't know what I was thinking when I decided that it was only an A. I think it was just because I hadn't really thought about everything. That was one of my earlier draft classes. I hadn't really gotten the full context yet, but I am now retroactively correcting a mistake, which is having the Miami Dolphins as an A and not an A+. The second best draft class was the Pittsburgh Steelers. I said Arizona had the best day 3. You guys had the best day 2. Your first round pick, Troy Fontenot, really, really good player. He's going to start at left tackle or at right tackle or at left guard or at right guard or at center, and he's going to be a phenomenal player. Zach Frazier is going to start somewhere along the interior of the offensive line and be, I think, in all honesty, a borderline Pro Bowl caliber center year one. Love Zach Frazier. Roman Wilson is going to be your wide receiver 2 behind Pickens and just be a tremendous value and just a really, really solid second option. Peyton Wilson is going to, assuming health, I should say, is going to start at linebacker and be a very, very good player for you guys. Mason McCormick is someone who could develop into a starting offensive lineman very easily. I think he could absolutely do that. Logan Lee, I think, is someone who is going to be a rotational caliber player on that defensive line year one. And Ryan Watts, a corner out of Texas, is a developmental defensive back that I think could end up starting at the tail end of year one, or probably by year 2 or 3 end up being a contributing player. This is a superb draft class. Every single one of your picks I could see becoming starters within 2 or 3 years. And even though I'm splitting hairs here somewhat, Philadelphia had the best draft class. They had the best pick of the first round, in my mind, with Quinyon Mitchell, getting a top 10 graded player in the entire draft class at pick 22 is tremendous value. You follow that up with a top 20 graded player with Cooper DeJean, and you're just knocking it out of the park with these picks. Tad bit of a reach, Jalix Hunt, in my opinion. Will Shipley is your Saquon Barkley insurance package. Anais Smith is going to contribute from the slot. Jeremiah Trotter, I think, is someone who could absolutely end up being a starting linebacker. Trevor Keegan is, I think, worst case scenario, a quality backup offensive guard who could come in and you don't got to worry about it. But I think he is someone who could develop into a starter as well. Johnny Wilson, wide receiver, big slot, tight end. I don't think it matters. That's a really, really good player that I think is going to find a role at the next level. I had a top 100 grade on him. I think just tremendous value at pick 185 in the 6th round. Love that pick. And all around, a tremendous draft class. I think 7 of these 9 players, potentially even 8 or 9, beyond that could end up contributing or starting after year one or year two. This is a almost all-time draft class if these players all do what I think they're going to do. But that's just me, and what do I know? I'm just some asshole on the internet giving you his opinion. And it's at this point where I'd like to remind you to like the video if you liked it, subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and if you disagree with me at any point, go ahead and drop a preferably well thought out comment down below in the comment section. And now, with the outro done and out of the way, there's only one thing left to say, and that's that I'll see you next time.